there is relief and grace and on the other side of that huge step. You know what I mean? And it might feel so like shameful and so whatever, but like God always meets us with grace.
What's going on, everybody? Today on Big Questions, it's gonna look a little bit different. Stefanie's not here.
And I'm now replacing Stefanie.
Forever.
Just
kidding. But anyways, this is Geoff.
I'm Geoff. Nice to meet you.
With a G.
Yes.
Yep.
Geoff.
Geoffrey. But
My
anyways,
name is Geoff.
My name is Geoff. But today on Big Questions, we're talking about addiction.
Life-dominating sins.
That was a good one. Can I get out?
Is there hope for me?
Oh gosh!
I was trying to throw in your face. Didn't work out. This is why Stefanie needs to be here.
Wow. Well, today we're having conversations with our very good friend and high school pastor over at Port City. I almost said it again.
Port City Java.
Yep, Port City Church. I don't know why. I don't even like Port City Java.
Neither do I.
But this is
we
Geoff.
We just slammed Port City Java. We can't do that.
I know. I love you guys, but don't like coffee. So anyways, today on Big Questions, we have Geoff, and we're talking about addiction, and it's going to be incredible.
So here are some answers to today's
Big Question. Hey everybody, I'm here with Geoff Banks right now with Port City, and I'm excited to dive into the conversation about addiction. How do you overcome addiction? And my first question is like, define addiction. I know it's broad, but like, what is addiction?
For sure. I actually use the word addiction and another term kind of interchangeably. The other term that we use is life-dominating sin.
Oh, that's good.
Because I think whenever we really define it in the context of our relationship with God, like addiction ends up being a sin that we put before Him, right?
Yeah.
It's a sin that we can't control. It's a sin that dominates our life. And I think that's really what addiction looks like, right? It's an action or a thing that kind of takes over our life that I think the defining factor is like, you can't stop when you want to.
Ooh,
like you get to a place and you're like, oh, I wish I wasn't doing this or like this or whatever, and you can't stop.
Ooh, that's good, man. That's really, I like that. What do you think are some of the things that today our students, like maybe you look out into your student ministry and you're like, oh man, here's some big things that people are addicted to that might not even know they're addicted to it?
Sure. So I know that whenever when we talk about addiction, the first thing that always comes to mind is like drugs, alcohol, substances.
Of course.
And I think that is a reality for a lot of students that they struggle with. But I think there's some that are in our lives, like some life-dominating sins that we might not even realize that's what they are. And the biggest one that always comes to mind for me is like what people think about us. Like, and I know it's weird to think about it as an addiction, but I think that whenever we think about social media, I mean, people have always cared about what people think about them, right? That's not new.
Since the beginning of time.
Right. And but I think what is new, and I know youth pastors love to harp on social media and how terrible it is, but like I love social media. Like I've recently become addicted to TikTok, which is horrible.
They call me TikTok Tuck.
Right. Do they really?
I call myself that.
But like I think the difference is like all of a sudden, like who we are is constantly put on display 24/7, and you have to manage it, right? Like I have to manage what people see about me on social media. And I think that lots of times we become obsessed with that. Like we become obsessed with people's approval, and it's crazy. So I think that's definitely one that gets to students and just people in general, not just students. And I think there's a myriad of other things. And I think the base question is like, what are you putting your hope in? Like, what are you trusting before you trust God? Like, what do you go to whenever life is hard or whenever something bad happens or whatever? Like, what's the first thing you run to?
I always like to say, like, you're addicted to it when it's your first thought when you wake up in the morning. Like, it's like, that's your first thought. It's not, what am I going to do today? It's how can I get this and get my hands on this, and how can I achieve this?
Absolutely.
And so, addiction is very broad. There's a lot of different things that you can be addicted to. But I would even just say, like, as simple as like anything that is before God and above God in your own heart and mind.
Absolutely.
Like, that's a sin.
And I think the cool thing is like that tendency in us, like all the negative tendencies we have have a correct expression.
Yeah.
So like that tendency in us to like latch on to something and like hold on to it and look to it for hope and life and joy and everything else that's the wrong expression of it, right? The right expression is that the first thing you think of whenever you wake up in the morning is Jesus, right? And his sacrifice and his love
that's
for
good,
us.
man.
So whenever that like part of us latches onto him, that's like the beautiful expression of addiction, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how it's supposed to be.
Oh, that's good.
Us addicted to Jesus, right?
Yeah, we were created for that. We were created to worship and solely desire one thing. Christ even tells Mary or Martha, there is only one thing that is necessary, and I'm not going to take that away from Mary, right?
Yeah, so good.
So obviously with every big question, there's always, like in every sin, there's always some statistics that go about it, and there's numbers that we can talk about that sometimes they get lost, but I just wanted to hear from you some of the statistics that stood out to you, and then maybe even how you are a part of that statistic.
Yeah, so I'm not like I wish I like knew all the exact numbers and stuff, you know, but I don't. But one of the things that I think is both like scary to me and also like very important, I think for students to know, for you guys to know, is that the earlier you start using any substance, whether it's vaping or cigarettes, or I don't even know if anyone smokes cigarettes anymore. It seems like everyone just Juuls.
Juuls, yeah. Juul life.
Like whatever, like the earlier you start, the more likely you are to be addicted later in life.
Yep.
And it's crazy because like your brain is, and whenever I was a student, I used to hate whenever people used to tell me the statistic because it's like you're trying to call me dumb. But like the part of your brain that assesses risk isn't developed all the way yet, not until you're 25.
Wow.
So it's not like it's just students, right? Like there are adults whose brains are not fully developed yet, right? So, and that while that part isn't fully developed, the part of your brain that experiences pleasure is. So you're like perfectly set up for addiction because you will see like all the good things before you see the bad things.
Yeah.
And then by the time you realize all these, it gets big enough for you to realize it, it's too late. Like you're already in it, you know, you're stuck in it. So I think like being aware of that makes such a huge difference. And I think the danger of it is like, especially when it comes to substance abuse in general, like whenever we're all dying for acceptance and dying for a place to belong and dying for people to love us, that it's like an instant shared experience.
Yeah.
Like if we both smoke weed, if we both Juul, if we both whatever, like we instantly have this thing in common and we have something to talk about and we have, a reason to be together, and it creates like, it gives us a lot of things that we're looking for in a really negative way. So.
Yeah, and how does that relate to your story? Like tell us a little bit about, your story with addiction.
Sure. So, to make a very long story short.
My entire life I was born. And then...
Yeah, exactly. But I grew up with a dad as a pastor. My mom was a social worker. I had an awesome childhood.
Wow.
But yeah, so I was like I grew up in the church. And I think it was around I think whenever you're younger, like elementary school, you really look to your parents for like approval. You want your parents to think you're awesome. You want your parents to care. But as you start to get older, you start to look more to like your friends and the people around you. Like I care more in high school. I care more about what this friend thinks than I necessarily do what my parents think. For a lot of students, I think it's that perspective starts to shift. So whenever I was going into middle school, high school, I was looking for approval from my friends, and it just so happened that a lot of my friends weren't necessarily great examples. So just like that statistic that the earlier you get into it, the more likely you are to end up addicted. I started messing around with like cigarettes and drinking and in middle school, and by the time I was in high school, that had grown to like a full-blown pill addiction, and then it ended up getting worse as I went into college. So I was just like dying for that acceptance, and I found it there. And by the time I realized that like these people weren't great friends, this wasn't the acceptance I was really looking for, it was too late. And I like had these conceptions of what it was to follow Jesus. I think just because I had a dad as a pastor, I thought that like if you're going to be a Jesus follower, you have to like, I don't know, like tuck in your shirt and like be very like, like Bible thump all the time. And I was like, I don't want to be that. I didn't know, you know what I mean, that you could follow Jesus and still be an awesome person.
Right.
Like I really didn't know that. And so I just like went down that path in life for a very long time.
Right.
And
did your parents know that this was happening all along? I mean,
Yeah.
your parents know more than we ever think they know.
I know, it's so funny. Like I really thought I was getting away with a lot, but they were like, no, we knew.
Yeah.
For me, they found out like high school era, and I don't know that they ever really recognized the extent of it, but they knew something was up. And it wasn't until whenever I was about 16, 17, I started to get in like legal trouble, like in jail and stuff like that. And that's when they were like, oh gosh, like this isn't just like he's experimenting, like this is like his life right now. So much later, after college, in my early 20s, whenever I was 20, I moved to Wilmington. I kind of wanted a fresh start, and I'd had all these, attempts at trying to stop, which I think everyone does with all their addictions, right? You're like, I don't want to do this anymore, and you do whatever you can to stop. So I had all these attempts. Nothing really stuck. I'd be able to stop for even like 6 months or like a year, but nothing like really stayed. And I moved down here to Wilmington for like a fresh start, and met some guys who reversed that like perception of Christianity for me. Like met some guys who loved Jesus and were also really awesome. Like they skated and they surfed, and I was like, oh, like these are the things that I love to do. And these guys like unapologetically love Jesus.
That's awesome.
And they also didn't make me feel bad about my questions. Like whenever I had questions about faith, they're like, let's talk about it. That's great. And through that group of friends, I really got led to the Lord, and through that relationship with God, and again, this is a long story short. It was a very long process. It wasn't like a burning bush moment where everything changed. I love those stories; they're incredible, but it wasn't mine. Yeah. It was a long process of getting stuff out of my life that shouldn't be there, and moving my dependence from drugs to Jesus. And throughout that process, I feel like I looked back and was like, holy cow, it's been like a year since I've wanted for drugs. And like that was crazy to me, because I'd spent my whole life like wanting to do drugs, and all of a sudden I wanted Jesus more. And it was a miracle. Like honestly, it was a miracle. So it was this like long process that God really like worked in me through, through the people around me, and through my church and everything else, and it totally changed my life. And now I work with high school students. It's like I never would have guessed. Like, isn't
that great?
Yeah, it's so cool.
So as you've gone out of that, like looking back in, because when you're in it, you don't really like, oh, this is a sin and I'm bad. Like you pursue those sins. Maybe it's a sin, maybe you don't. Sure. And you have that guilt. But what looking back on it now, like what were some of the root sin issues that you had that caused a lot of these issues?
I think at its base, like at its very core, it's idolatry, right? Like I was looking to get things from my friends and from drugs and whatever else that I should have been getting from God. Yeah. Like acceptance and love and happiness and feeling good about myself and my identity. Like I was trying to get all these things from drugs and from my group of friends and from like our image and our lifestyle and everything else. So I think that was probably the biggest one, was idolatry. And I also think there was a level of like, whenever I was trying to get better, I would be in like groups of people that struggled with the same thing, and they'd be like, well, I figured out why I did what I did, and they would have like this long explanation. I was like, man, I really just did it because it felt good, like on some level. So I think that was, whether you want to call it like lust or gluttony or whatever, like there was a level of like I did it because it felt good, and no one gets into drugs or anything. No one starts doing anything, looking at pornography, getting on social media, eating, whatever, because they want to be addicted. That's never anyone's goal. We get into it because it feels good or it makes us feel better or whatever else. And then by the time it grows into that huge sin, then it's too late. Or it's not too late, but it's a lot more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, because there's those consequences, for every action, and with that, like, you got to deal with those consequences. I mean, there's either, that addiction, there's that jail time, there's whatever. Like there's all kinds of people stop talking to you for some reason.
And I think that's the biggest thing that seems to suffer in addictions of any kind, like whether it's social media or eating or drugs or whatever. The things that tend to suffer is like our relationships around us.
Which is funny because that's how you got into that addiction,
right?
Wanting relationships. Wow, full circle right there, man. So talking about just the tension of justifying it when you're in it. Like when you're in that addiction, you're about to act on whatever that addiction may be. There's that justification process of like, do I want to do it or do I don't want to do it? And I don't know if this happens every time, but it had to have happened in your story at some points. Like, am I gonna hit this right now? Am I gonna do this drug right now? Am I gonna hang out with this crowd right now? What was that like? What was that like justification process?
You know, you'll tell yourself whatever you have to be able to do it. And I don't know if you ever like recognize that in the moment. Like you don't know that you're justifying it. Like you're not thinking like, well, what excuse can I give myself to be able to do this?
That's
right?
true.
Like, it's just like the sinful, like fallen self, like does what it has to do to get what it wants. And then it's not until hindsight that you're like, oh, that's not true. Like I totally convinced myself of this lie so that I could do the thing that I thought I wanted, you know?
Yeah, we lie to ourselves to make ourselves feel better. And then on the back end, when maybe we're feeling guilty or maybe we're feeling whatever the feeling is afterwards where you know, oh man, I messed up. And maybe that stopped eventually, like as you got deeper into that addiction. I know for me personally, I was highly addicted to pornography growing up. And there was a time when I would try to like get out of it, and then I'll be like, no, just this one more time. I'll watch this one video, or I'll look at this one image one more time. And from there, like, I think what happened is as I got deeper into it, I stopped caring. And I stopped caring about myself even. Like I stopped caring about my personal health, my personal like relationships with people, my relationship with my parents. And so like that addiction destroyed a ton of things. But for some reason, I kept justifying it because it felt good.
Right. And I think that's when it gets bad, is whenever like we resolve ourselves to it. We're like, well, I'm just gonna stop. Like if I have to like trick myself into doing this every time, I'm just gonna stop thinking about it and I'm just gonna do.
This is who I am now.
Right. Exactly.
And that's, if you're at that point right now, I want to let you know, like, no, that's not who you've been created to be. You've been created by a God who loves you, who cares about you, and who wants to put you in relationships and healthy community. So I think that's super important. And like, don't keep it a secret. I mean, that's probably why, you know, my addiction went on so long, is because I kept it from everybody. At what point do you say, I need help, and then seek it? Like, how do you do that when you're so addicted and you don't want the secret to be out?
I know for me, like there were times where I did not want to tell. Like I did not want to ask for help. I did not want to tell anyone. Like but at the same time, I'm watching the walls fall down around me, whether it's my relationships or like my emotions, like I just wasn't happy with myself, or I was beating myself up, or my relationship with God was being destroyed, or whatever it was. Like I was watching this happen, and everything in me was like, you can't tell anyone this. Like, you cannot tell anyone this. But I had to, like, ask God for the strength, like, God, like, help me do this. Like, help me go tell someone. And I, you know, go to someone that you trust. And, like, literally, it's just like, you just, like, spit it out. And I know there were times for me where I got caught, and it was almost like a relief. Because I didn't, like, that was me telling someone. You know what I mean? It happened for me. Like, and, you know, I don't know if it was, you know, maybe it was God putting that in my path, you know what I mean? Maybe not, but I think that that's how it is once you get up that mountain of telling someone, the other side is so much easier. Because you're like, oh, it's like this weight lifted off your shoulders. You know, so I think there is relief and grace, and on the other side of that huge step. You know what I mean? And it might feel so like shameful and so whatever, but like God always meets us with grace, you know, and usually the people that we trust usually do much more than we expect them to, you know?
That's good. That's really good. Yeah. And I mean, I think when you're in the midst of any addiction, if it is like, we can call it the hard stuff, but I would say anything that is keeping you and your relationship growing with God is hard stuff. You know,
absolutely.
I don't care if it's social media to you doing heroin. Like, it's keeping you from God. And so, like, with that, what is the Bible? And I know, like, this is not the thing that people want to hear when they're addicted to anything.
Sure.
But what does the Bible say and talk about addiction? And who are the people in the Bible that went through addiction?
Yeah, and you know, I think there is some like really awesome examples. I don't know about you, whenever I'm giving messages, lots of times I'll be like, well, the Bible doesn't exactly talk about this. We can take some principles from it that make sense. I think a lot of ways, Bible pretty straightforward talks about addiction in some form or another, even though it might not use that word. And by the way, just to say, I think sometimes that whole like, oh, well, my social media addiction isn't as bad as heroin, or my, you know, this isn't as bad as that. Like, that's another justification, right? But I think one of my favorite story that kind of shows someone in addiction in Scripture is the prodigal son. Right, it's a parable that Jesus told. It's in, I think, Luke 15. Starting in verse 11. And while it doesn't like explicitly say he was addicted, it says, I think the words it uses, he squandered his property on wild living. Which is like such a great line. No one would say that nowadays. Stop wild living. But you know, I think what it speaks to is like he destroyed his relationships, his family. He basically treated his dad as though he was dead so that he could go do the things that he wanted to do. Like that's how far his addiction to, you know, whatever drinking and partying and whatever his lifestyle was had gotten to. Like that was the point that he was like, I don't care about my family. I don't care about anything. Like this is what I want to do and who I am. Exactly. So I think the beautiful part is the end of that story, right? Because it shows all of these principles at work, right? Because the prodigal son, he was willing to come back to his dad. His dad runs to the end of the street and throws his arms around him, right? And it's this beautiful example of what happens on the other side of opening up, right? It's Jesus throws his arms around you. Your parents throw their arms around you. Your friends do, you know what I mean? And whenever we get to that point, we're met with grace. And I think we can trust God with that. And then also, I think the other big thing to notice for everyone, like even if you're listening to this, I would say almost everyone probably has some life-dominating sin in their life that they could deal with at some point. But even if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, that's not me, one thing that I think is also really important is being that father to people. Like, so being the type of person that your friends can come to you, your family can come to you, your brother, your sister, whoever can come to you and say, hey, I'm really struggling. Because you have to live in such a way and treat them in such a way that they know that they can do that. So I think that's the other really cool example that we can take is like, I want to be that type of person where really you know that you can come to me and be like, I'm struggling, and that I'm the one who throws my arms around you and helps you. You know?
Wow. What is the best way, like in the moment, to flee from that addiction? Say you are, you know, you've recognized I'm broken, I need help, you've sought help, that's probably the first thing. But now you're on this road to sanctification, you're on this road of healing, and there's a moment of like, oh man, I'm tempted with this again. How do you flee from that?
So I mean, obviously the easiest thing is to stop it before it ever starts. So like recognizing like, what are the things that lead me to this point? And I think you have to get like gut level honest with yourself and think about like, you know, like let's say your struggle is pornography, like what is it that leads up to me doing this, that leads up to me looking at these videos or whatever it is, and drawing like honest, real boundaries there. Like if it's, I know every time I'm in my room at night alone with my phone, I go to this website or I look at this, I look at that, maybe leave your phone to charge in the kitchen. You know what I mean? And like draw some boundaries, even if they seem weird or strange or whatever, draw some boundaries. Find an accountability partner, I think is a big one too. So like having people in your life that A, know you struggle with something, and B, will ask you how you're doing with it. And C, will call you out.
That's good.
You know, if you're messing up. And I think asking God about who that person could be is really important, praying about it. But I think it's all about, like, so much of it is about honesty. Whenever it comes to to addictions of any kind,
Yep.
it thrives in isolation.
That's good.
It thrives
It
whenever we're alone, whenever it's in darkness, and it's whenever we bring it into the light and submit it to God and submit it to our friends and our family that love us, that we're freed from it, that God will use that to free us from it. So I think it really is honestly so much about honesty, and then once you're on the other side of it, it's drawing boundaries and going to God in moments of temptation. And I think this is a big one. It's being honest when you mess up, because lots of times I'll come and I'll say, hey Tucker, I'm really struggling with pornography, and then you'll keep me accountable and I'll get over it for maybe like a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever else, and I'll want you to think that I'm like perfect now. That all of a sudden, we dealt with that a month ago, I'm good. And then I'll mess up, I'll make a mistake, I'll cross the boundary, I'll whatever, and I don't want to tell you. You know what I mean? Because I still want you to think everything's good. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt me or whatever. So I think recognizing that like you might mess up, like hopefully you don't, like praise God if you don't. But sometimes we do mess up. And whenever you do, it's being honest about it and going to, your accountability partner, the people you talk to about it, and say, hey, I slipped up. I messed up. And that is usually the crossroads between diving right back to where you were or moving forward in freedom. And there's been times in my life where I've had to do that and go and say, hey, I messed up, and I found so much freedom in that moment, and allowing God to use it and move me forward rather than diving back the other way and getting back to where I was.
That's so good. So that restoration process, what I'm hearing is that talking to people is huge. Talking to people is the best thing you can do. Who do we talk to?
Yeah, so I think for every student, even whenever this doesn't feel true, you all have people in your life that care about you and love you. Even if you don't feel like it's your parents or your friends or whatever, like you at least have, you guys here and your small group leader here. And, I think at church is an incredible place to start. And I also think like the people who see you the most is your parents. Like your parents see you more than anybody else. And they also want to care for you and love you and see you thrive probably more than a lot of people do, right? Like your parents are awesome, even whenever it doesn't feel like it, So I think going to them is a great place to start. And sometimes I know if you feel like you can't, you could go to a small group leader. Like I've had students come and say, hey, can you help me talk to my parents?
No, that's good, man.
And like, let's sit down and do it together. Like,
I love that.
So I think church is a great place to start. Family is probably the best place to start, and of course your friends is good to bring in on it, because those are the people that we often feel like we can be the most honest with. So.
No, I think that's great, and I want to remind everyone who is watching right now, whether you're a student or you're an adult or whatever, that you matter, and like God has a great plan for you, and it's not a plan of addiction to the things of this world.
Right.
We need to be looking to the things above, and watching God work in our life is such a joy. And watching Him put us in community with other people is such a joy. And I would hate for you guys to miss out on those opportunities because you're off searching for something else.
Sure. Yeah.
But remember, though, you can always come back. God is always there. He's waiting for you to come back. All you got to do is turn and run to Him, just like the prodigal son. The father was waiting. And then when he came back, he celebrated. And so I want to celebrate with you as you get out of these addictions, as you go through these addictions, and turn away from them, turn away from those sin issues, turn away from that lust, that idolatry, whatever it may be. And that's what we believe for you guys. And so something that we always say with Scotts Hill students is, remember, you matter. That was excellent.
Boom.
Boom sauce. Nailed it.